you don't want them frozen when you're going into your cook, because then that takes longer and you could overcook the sauce. For these particular shrimp, they are already shelled, or they're already peeled and deveined, which is great. You get rid of that the poop sack in the shrimp, and it just left the tails on, which is nice for presentation. You don't have to leave tails on. You can have the tails removed. It's all personal preference. Okay, so to start off with, let me just increase that music a little bit here. I did take an onion and I cut it in half. And when you want to do this, you don't need a whole lot of onion. So I'm just slicing this onion here into thin strips. Now you can also dice your onions if you want. If you want a more, how do I pronounce it? Like a larger volume of it. So this one I sliced it so it's easier to manage and easier for me to cook with. And it's also nice for presentation too, because you get, instead of having these like little chunks of onions everywhere, you got these nice clean slices. Now you got to be very careful when you cut in. Obviously, you don't want to cut your fingers. You notice that I have right here, my fingers are curled, which is always a good thing to do when you're cooking and when you're slicing. So that way you don't accidentally cut the tip of your fingers or in any way. You can push the onion through and your knuckles rub against the knife, and this ensures safety. And in the kitchen, you always want to be safe. You don't want to cut a finger off or do any body harm. And as I got to the end of the onion, you saw that, let me just reverse that back here. As I got to the edge, I actually flipped the onion onto its side. So that way I can continue cutting without getting closer and closer to my fingers and potentially slicing things. Now obviously as you get to the edge, it does get a little bit more trickier, but yeah, I got that little piece of skin that came off there, of the onion skin, sorry, not my skin. And yeah, you just kind of clean everything. Make sure you're very careful with the knife. I'm very scared of always cutting myself. And you just put all the onions off to the side. Now, like, you can dice these smaller if you want. That is completely up to you. I like to leave it as larger pieces. And make sure you always clean your workstation afterwards. So this was all I needed the cooking board and the cutting board and the knife for. So I'm also using, I'm trying to cover up the brand name because I don't know if like sponsors get mad at that sort of stuff. But I am using minced garlic for this. Now you can use a whole clove of garlic and you do the same thing. You just cut into small little slices as you go. For this one, I had minced garlic in my fridge, so I decided to just use that instead. Both are still fine. Obviously the fresh garlic will have a more fresher taste to it, but it still works perfectly. So now, obviously, you get the whole story of waiting for a pot of water to boil. So once you get your water going, I did about, how much was that? Sorry. About a half a container full of water, because you want enough water to cook your pasta in it. And obviously, with this amount of water, it does take time. I think it took about 20 minutes roughly for this water to come to boil. And that's what you want. You want boiling water as you go. So now my water is heating up. It's boiling. I put the pasta in. You kind of just drop it in, let it kind of spiral out for that nice effect. It's always kind of cool to see that in restaurants and on cooking shows. Now, for this particular dish, I thought that much pasta wasn't enough. So I actually added some more pasta into it, because I made the mistake of not thinking about how much the pasta will expand in the water. And that's always something to keep in mind, whether you're cooking pasta, you're cooking rice, it will absorb water and it will expand. So it will be more than you initially expect. And of course, me being in my infinite wisdom, I added more pasta thinking it wasn't enough. That was a bit of a mistake, so I have leftover pasta, but you know what, I can use it for something else down the road. Now, it takes about 10, 12-ish minutes, depending on how you like your pasta to be cooked, for it to fully cook and soften. Now, you'll notice I'm being very carefully as I'm stirring the pasta here, because it is still very brittle at this point, and you don't want to break your pasta, because that just doesn't look appealing when you have little strings of spaghetti pasta on your plate. So I'm just doing it very carefully, moving things around just so as the part that's submerged is getting softer and bends, I can get the parts that are not submerged to go into the water and soften up. Now you see that the pasta is cooking, everything's bubbling, which is great. And you want to keep stirring your pasta constantly just so it doesn't sit at the bottom, it doesn't clump together, it won't burn, but it could. You want to keep things moving so that it doesn't the pieces of the pasta don't stick together. Because that is a problem that will happen with pasta and I'll show that in a couple minutes actually, of what you should do to ensure you get some nice clean noodles for when you're eating instead of like a big clump of just noodles, like a bunch of noodles just clumped together. Sorry, I'm not explaining that properly. Okay, so again, 10 to 12 minutes or to your desired level of al dente firmness. You don't want it too soft, you don't want it too hard. So I missed a part there. I thought I was filming it when I was taking the noodles out of the pot. What I did here is, let me just reverse this a couple of seconds here. So I actually put the noodles into a colander, and that colander is in a bowl with a paper towel underneath, so it catches the water that drips out, and I can just kind of get all my noodles out, get them to dry out so they're not just heavily coated in just water. Another thing you can do is, if you don't want to use a bowl, you put it in your sink, put the colander in your sink, and you can just carefully pour the hot water and the noodles into the colander. Careful though, it will splash. So you want to do it slowly, but not too slow. And